everybody hear me if I don't talk into the mic? I just want to thank the staff here at Pine Mountain for their hospitality and for making us wonderful food and taking care of all of our various wants and needs, as well as the planning committee and especially Sunshine Brosi, who I think have done an awesome job with the conference. So the project I'm going to talk about today is the result of my master's thesis, which I just completed. So because of abbreviated time, I'm just going to talk about the management implications that came out of the research that we did. So just to give some brief definitions of urbanization and why kind of we're concerned about it, this refers to the movement of population of people into urban areas, and thereby the development of infrastructure that's associated with these urban environments, like roads and sidewalks and buildings. And these bullet points are just some scary points from the UN World Urbanization Prospects report. Just talking about that over half of the world's population as of 2014 live in urban areas. And the implications of this are habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, loss of biodiversity. So I kind of think because cities aren't going away, we need to start to think about how we can best utilize these urban ecosystems to provide things like habitat continuity and food resources for wildlife, potentially. One of the ways that we can kind of provide these things is by promoting urban green space. Urban forests are one of the main resources of urban green space, and they provide lots of benefits, both for humans and wildlife in the areas. They sequester CO2, mitigate stormwater runoff, they provide psychological benefits for those who live nearby. And they're also facing a lot of stress factors, especially in the urban environment. We think of abiotic and biotic stress factors when we think of street trees. So these abiotic stress factors are things like compaction, maybe less so in this region of the country, but in Frostburg there's a lot of impact from salt, put a lot of salt on the roads. Pollution, higher temperatures, the urban heat island effect. And these abiotic stress factors are a little bit hard to mitigate. They're really not going away just based on the environment that a city provides for a plant. So because of these abiotic stress factors, these trees end up a little bit more vulnerable to the biotic stress factors, which are things like pests, pathogens in the form of bacteria and fungi, viruses, other plants that are competing for the space. So we kind of want to try to mitigate potentially these biotic stress factors as much as we can. So my study was in Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia specifically. So we worked with the Urban Forestry Administration there, which is kind of under the umbrella of the District Department of Transportation. And just some brief little things about D.C. If you're not familiar, it's in the mid-Atlantic. It's kind of nestled between Maryland and Virginia along the Potomac and Anacostia rivers. It's about 15,000 hectares, and the human population is 660,000 people, approximately. So in order to evaluate the tree population there, we worked specifically with street trees in DC. So we had these data points that are associated with a geospatial location, each one. So each one represents a tree box. There were 157,000. So we only used the data points that we are sure had trees in them. Some of them were labeled things like empty or unknown. So we got rid of those. We also got rid of ones that did not contain species information. So we ultimately used 132,000 approximately data points, trees for this study. So in order to evaluate the risk of pest and disease to these street trees, we used what's called the Pest Vulnerability Matrix. So this is a fairly simple model. It was developed in 2008 in California by Igor Lacan and Joe McBride. And what we did essentially was take this, which was, again, developed in California. They made it to be easily manipulated and easily changed. So we worked with a plant pathologist and an entomologist and the Urban Forestry Administration in DC to change it so that it reflects the pests and diseases and the street trees that are seen in DC. So the columns list the pests and diseases, and the row across the top are the street tree species. So where those intersect, you'll see a risk rating. So each species of tree is given a number based on the severity and the number of pests and diseases that are associated with it. So you can then kind of get a quantitative value of pest vulnerability based on the proportions of those trees, right? So overall, the PVM score for DC was 11.88, which, if you read the literature, most of the PVM scores you can find are from the western states or from California. So I hesitate to compare that score to those because we changed this PVM model so much. So this is kind of novel for the Mid-Atlantic, the use of this particular model. We can, however, because we have those geospatial data points for each of the trees, we can look within the different areas in DC. So these are, DC is broken up by wards. There are 8 wards, that's the largest political designation. They're also broken up by ANCs, Advisory Neighborhood Commissions, and single member districts, which there are like 256 single member districts. So I'm going to focus on these Advisory Neighborhood Commissions for this because the purpose of why these were developed, they're represented by an elected official who votes on things that are relevant to the members of that local, that neighborhood, that community. So it's things like liquor licenses and trash routes and things like this. So this study with street trees, I think, is particularly relevant to that political designation. So you can see here on the map that the darker red, the darkest red represents the highest vulnerability, and the lightest represents low vulnerability to pests. So in order to make that 11.88 number kind of more relevant, we can look at how the different areas within the district kind of match up. So to that 11.88 value. So that red line there represents the district average of pest vulnerability. So those neighborhoods that are above the average can use that kind of as a goal to get down to, and thereby the whole average of the district. So one of the ways that we can mitigate this pest vulnerability issue is it's termed insulation with diversity. So that's essentially, many of these pests and diseases are host specific. So you find that if there's a street that's heavily populated with one species, if a pest or disease comes into that area, it's going to just decimate that whole population, right? Whereas if you have a more diverse street tree population, you could have a host-specific pest come in and it's only maybe going to impact a smaller percentage of those trees. So we use the Shannon Diversity Index, which takes into account both evenness and richness. We found that the average district-wide diversity score is 1.67, which does fall in the lower range of a natural ecosystem using this particular index. So we again use the same technique to quantify and visually interpret this diversity data. And we can then go into places where we might find low diversity and high pest vulnerability. So these regions are kind of most at risk, we consider, for, they don't have much diversity, and the species of trees that are in those regions are most impacted, or they have the highest pest vulnerability score. And then, I got good at GIS, this was fun. You can use data-driven pages or data-driven maps to then, so these are these two districts, this ANC 3D and ANC 3A. So we can go in, and these are the single member districts within those ANCs. So they can look at a finer scale to figure out where within their ANC the most problems are potential. So if you know anything about Washington, D.C., you might know that these are actually very, very wealthy areas of D.C. So we kind of wanted to think about maybe the management dollars shouldn't necessarily go to these most wealthy areas. Maybe it would be important for the management there to look at potential for issues involving like eco-equity, right? So you can also use demographic data to look at the areas that the X's represent below average street tree diversity, and the checks are above average. And this gradient is average income. So you can find places where there's an intersection between average income being low and low street tree diversity, and potentially apply management there or focus management issues there. And you can do the same thing. There's lots and lots of data available, just open to the public through DC's website, where you can just go in and upload all of these demographic data. So they can look, each A and C could take this and determine what socio-demographic factor is most important to them. Is it, the number of public schools in their area? Is it the number of, is it educational attainment? This particular map is the violent crime rate, So you can do just a lot with this data. The management implications of this project that I think are really kind of cool and important. So Sunshine and I went to DC, to the District Department of Transportation, and gave a final report. So in addition to my master's thesis, we had a 65-page final report that we gave to DC. It included an executive summary, which is just 1 to 2 pages and available to the public. And then we also gave the Urban Forestry Administration all of our data, the PVM spreadsheet, all the GIS files, and all of the associated data. So as their street tree population changes, we can actually take this PVM, go into it, alter it, update the GIS files accordingly, and continue to use it into the future. So I just want to acknowledge my committee members and some of the people that worked with us and the funding sources.